Our guest today, Maggi Thorne, is not only an American Ninja Warrior, she is a former Mrs. International and a D1 athlete. Listen today as she shares her stories of overcoming obstacles, walking out in faith, and never ever giving up. Welcome to Meet Me in the Penthouse. I am Amy, along here with my sister Molly. We help high-achieving women increase their income, but most importantly, their impact. We are neighbors, sisters, and business partners. We have built 8-figure businesses together, traveled the world together, raised our children together, mentored thousands of men and women together. And it's all because we have a penthouse mindset. We aim for the top, and we show others how to empower themselves to peel back the layers and truly step into their greatness and calling. Welcome to Meet Me in the Penthouse. Welcome to Meet Me in the Penthouse. My name is Amy Mosser, along with my sister Molly Kroeker and Maggi Thorne, one of my favorite people on earth. Oh my goodness gracious.
Likewise.
Thank you. Well, I'll tell you, when Molly and I started to make our list of people that we wanted on our podcast, you were number one on my list. You were someone that has had such a profound impact on me, and we met in such an unlikely way as we were working on a building together downtown, right? And I feel like we were soul sisters. You just changed my life from that moment on. So I want to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, share with our audience a little bit about your just D1 athlete. You have an American Ninja Warrior. I mean, really, you're the full package. Gorgeous, by the way, inside and out. So would you just share a little bit about your journey and to kind of bring us to where we met in 2014?
Yeah, first of all, I didn't know this was a compliment party. Let me go get my horn and confetti. Thank you for such an incredible introduction. I have so many of the same sentiments. And Molly, same with you. Follow your journeys. Love what you're doing. Thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here. You know, it's always funny when I talk to people because you're like, oh my gosh, I bet everything was just set out for you in your life. And like I had some kind of golden spoon. And I'm like, no, it's work. And also it's purpose. And anything we're also given our life, I believe at some point we might be called to walk away from it. And that's really hard, especially when you're like, oh my gosh, there's all these things and you just got a grip. But even the great things, the good things, successful things, we might need to be let go and let something else grow in ourselves. And so if we have that foundational piece, which we were talking about, which when I met you, I was still, I think, kind of having a hard time letting go of building buildings because we were trying to build a building and it wasn't necessarily helping me move into that next direction that I really fully needed to enter into, which was to build people. And even through the difficult ways that we have to let go of things or what that looks like or what we step away from, God always works, right? And we're always being transformed. And when I even think of, for I am God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus, do good works, which he prepared in advance for me to do, it actually means being written. And it just as you're being written. And have you talked about that thing you just shared with me? Can I say it in this podcast? Or is that like a...
Yes, no, please do.
Okay. I was like, I don't want to be the one to drop that bomb of your news.
You're dropping the bomb
news.
because it was your bomb.
That's right. I better ask. Your book, right? You're being written.
Yes.
It's
yes.
Poema, and it's beautiful to think like we're this beautiful poem that's always being written by the hand of God. And poems can be wild and crazy. And so that's our life. And I'm so thankful. Met you, energy right away. I remember sitting in your living room and you always had such a generous heart and spirit and your deep, deep care. Your industry, no matter what it is, it's more than industry, it's people. People aren't price tags to you. They're precious and there's purpose in it. I love that so much. And so that's been my direction, right? As long as I can equip, empower, and encourage people, that's my foundation. And I want to walk in purpose in that, which means like, okay, I'm open-handed. So career switch, walking away from Ninja Warrior, re-entering Ninja Warrior, and we're flexible to what life can bring us. What I try to remember is my nevers. Like I'll say, I will never own a nonprofit. And recently God's like, I think you're going to own a nonprofit someday. And I'm like, no, but that was a never, you know? And so can we let go of our nevers? or be in tune with them. So I've tried to, I'm very cautious. If I start to say never, I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I know God's going to hear that. Hold on. Fear the Lord. So that's the start there and where it's brought me. And I'm very thankful for all of the career pivots, which has now brought me to vice president of AIM Institute for philanthropy and communications, which is just, I'm delighted to help empower Omaha and beyond in that way.
Okay,
Oh
I'm
my
so
goodness.
curious. I got to jump in because I'm like, I remember these words too. I'm never going to give my child licorice. I remember saying that, like, till you have a toddler that's screaming in the back and you can't, your arm isn't long enough, but a piece of licorice will extend just far enough back there. I'm like, okay, what other I nevers, Maggie? Like any that stand out that you're like, I'm never, and you're like, woo, whoops, I should not have done that.
Oh gosh, especially in parenting, right? When you see someone else and you don't have kids yet, you're like, I'll never. And I remember silly things like, I'll never let my kid have a snotty nose. And one day I saw my kid and I was like, I don't have a tissue in sight. This might need to last for a minute. Wait, I think I said something about this at one point in my, I mean, that's probably the biggest area we have nevers is as a parent. And then there are these own humans that are being formed at, we're just really stewards and we don't have control of. And so you're like, yep, all that's out the window. But it's beautiful. It's beautiful in that way too. And licorice sounds delicious now. So thank you.
One of my favorite things about you, Maggie, is like when Molly was talking about, as we were saying, like, I'll never do this. There are probably lots of things that you thought you would never do. And I have had the pleasure, I'm going to say that I have had the pleasure of seeing you pivot and handle challenges, adversity, tough, bold decisions with such grace and beauty. And one of the things that I've seen you do, and this is where when we were sitting on my sofa, taking you back to my sofa, and you were very, like I said, a D1 athlete, and you were working for the college. In fact, would you mind sharing the story of you getting that job at the university where you ran track? It's so humbling. I just love it.
Yeah, I even think to set the stage for that, I didn't grow up doing sports. I'm from a low-income home, multifamily home. Both my brothers were high school dropouts, in and out of jail. So I had actually never even had any kind of table set for me. I hadn't seen what it takes for someone or success or order. It was chaos and a very destructive home. And so, which in a way became an asset to me in my careers because I'm like, oh, chaos, I understand this. And I'll jump back to that later. But I had a teacher present an opportunity. They thought I looked fast in PE, which then meant I tried out for track, which went on to me becoming the #1 runner in California state champion in the hurdles, which is what got me to Nebraska, right? But so as a kid, I did start to understand two things: advocacy. So I'll start with one, advocacy, and two, the what ifs. What if I showed up and tried something that I've never done? Because I didn't have any of those experiences at all. Just a very quiet, kind of lonely kid. And me and my Hot Wheel cars. So it brings me to Nebraska. I think I'm going to live out my days in sweatpants. I'm enrolled in a master's program for nutrition. I'm so certain about that at that point. And I had spare time, got a job working for Nebraska Athletics in their capital planning and construction as a student worker on the grounds crew. I was essentially a custodian. I've wiped down every single bleacher in Memorial Stadium myself, learned you don't power wash your foot, and vacuumed every suite. And eventually I went on to design and manage the facilities I cleaned for 10 years, $340 million in projects. And I started as a custodian. And what started that actually was Boyd Epley said, Maggie, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I don't know, Boyd. Here I am. I'm 24. But I know one thing. I'll never wear a suit and I'll never be in an office. And I spent the next 10 years in a suit in an office. So that was one of my first very poignant nevers. I was so certain. And what it came to is I had to make a choice at a very young age because they said, you could work for us, but I have to let you know we Can't promise you full time. We don't know what the outcome will be. And you don't have the experience. So you have to start at a lower salary. It was all like very like, here's why you shouldn't work for us, you know, or I would have to stay enrolled in my master's program nutrition. I had to make a choice. And I knew at that point, I believe this is a part of my purpose. And it was a what if. I'm not a fearless person, but I'm a curious person. And I believe in being uncomfortable. And I had to walk into an industry that I knew nothing about and taught myself every single architectural program, AutoCAD engineering programs, all by myself, self-taught, Photoshop, and it jumped in and immersed. And I had people talk me out of it. They don't care. You can't do this. Look where you came from. I had to compete for a job against a gentleman who had a master's degree in architecture. I had a bachelor's degree in community health, and a year before I was wiping down bleachers. So, you know, we can talk ourselves out of things. We can pigeonhole ourselves and say, well, I don't have this and I don't have that. But what if you did? Are you willing to work for it? That's one of the first questions. Like, can I be uncomfortable in this? And that means you have to be uncomfortable with failure and people seeing your failure and admitting that you don't know things. And that can be scary too, because we want to know everything. I think sometimes, especially as ladies, like we want to have the answers and be useful and do these things, but it's okay if you don't, because that creates collaboration and teamwork, and that comes back to values. So that is my first, I'll never, that turned into my next, that everything that happened at Nebraska Athletics really shaped that next decade on purpose for me. Actually,
Okay.
I knew in the middle of it, this is going to get used. And at some point, I'm going to be asked to let go of everything that's been handed to me.
Okay. Okay. You have teed this one up, sister. So here we go. You're going to swing, girl.
I love it.
This is the conversation. Cut to the conversation 2014 when we were sitting in my living room sofa and I had just walked through a relationship change. I was a single mama trying to maintain a gorgeous home on 100% commission with a whole lot of faith and just knowing God would put the right women in my life. And
Yeah.
in you walk. And I remember sitting on that sofa and you told me about the time that you were maybe nursing a baby, you'd put 100 hours in that week and just of building onto the buildings and the download or the calling that you got from God that made you walk away from it. Would you share that story? Because it's in my book.
Yeah. It's funny you talked about nursing on a job site. That was a thing, first of all, which another never, you know. So it was 2011. And my best friend in the whole world, she had just taken her life. And it was the day of her funeral. I was pregnant and I'm watching her casket go into the ground. And that was when God said, build people, not buildings. And I was like, what's happening? What is this? And it was like, it was yelled at me, right? Build people, not buildings. And I had leading up to that, I had been so busy, constant 70-hour weeks, job sites, early mornings, late nights. My family is having family dinners at a conference table. And I'm like, my son is falling asleep on carpet samples, you know? And I'm like, what am I doing? I could go out and I could put my name on all of these buildings and have that, but is that what it is? And I really had to take a step back. And because quite honestly, like I loved it. I loved the power and the authority. And I used to joke, I have every woman's dream job. I get to tell hundreds of men what to do and spend millions of dollars. And but if that's why I was doing that, then I'm missing the mark. And I've even been thinking about this recently over time as I really try to ask myself, why would I want this responsibility? Because responsibility is a huge privilege. And my heart needs to be pointed in the right direction to really empower people. So I had loved that. And I wasn't sure I was loving people. And my friend, she had called me. She'd gotten out of rehab. She'd wanted to see me. And I told her I was too busy. And that was the weekend she took her life. And so the day of her funeral, I really felt like I'm really missing the mark in this world. And I need to build people and not buildings. And I told my boss, said, I think I'm going to leave Nebraska Athletics. finished out, this is in the middle of our biggest capital campaign, finished out that portion of it. And everyone told me I was never be successful again. I was making a huge mistake. Look at where you came from. Are you sure? But I said, I know who I am and what I'm meant to do. Thank you for your opinion. But I believe this is my call. It even affected my close family and friends who were quite honestly a little angry with me, thought I was being a fool. And I was like, I know what God's asking me, that I can't not know. And I know this is incredibly uncertain. I had a high paying, stable career that I was being asked to leave, is what I felt. So that was a lot of uncertainty. But when I actually fully moved into it, which was after you and I had worked on that building project, and I really
You make me cry every time telling that story. Every time we tell it here, I'm like, I don't think you're supposed to cry on the podcast, but I am.
sweet. Yeah.
I think this is so good for people to know is you made a decision. You drew a line in the sand, you made a decision, and people were not on board with that. And so to know that some of your closest people, right? Like it's easy to walk away from the judgment and opinions of people you really don't know because we assume we know what they're thinking. But when people close to you are thinking it and saying it to you, did those relationships get severed? Were they restored? Or did you just walk away from them? Because obviously you're sharing your story. It's going to encourage somebody else to, I can think of a few friends that did exactly what you did and how hurt they were. So tell us a little bit more about that when you close family members.
Yeah, that's a great question. And congratulations on being the first person ever to ask me that. In terms of that, yeah, I mean, it strained my marriage at the time and it was very, very difficult, especially, well, how come you can hear God telling you that and I don't hear it? And I really wanted to be so in tune with the Spirit every day, even now, asking myself what that looks like and making sure that, okay, is this from you, and my friendships got very strained. They are in health now, but it's also where, and this isn't the point of it. I want to say they've come back later and been like, yeah, I see it. And I will say, I was filming Spartan. I was in Atlanta, Spartan Ultimate Team Challenge, and I'm actually already divorced. It was like recent, 2 months, but my ex-husband was there because he was the one who I would trust with my kids. So he's in Atlanta. My ex-husband's in the stands and I run over to my kids. We just did great. And for the first time ever, he looked at me and he reached out his hands and he said, "You were meant for this." And I was like, now you tell me we're already divorced? No, I mean, and it was actually like one of the sweetest moments I had ever had with him. And so you don't know what God's gonna do. And that's when we can lose hope, but that's where you're like, well, my hope is in him. And so I think there are ways to tune into yourself. And I want to be very clear. I'm not saying I did everything right, or I've always had like that has come with mistakes too. And if we can own that, like this might be weird to say, I love being an adult. Most people, they may not say that, like personal responsibility, sign me up. That's really where I'm at. And I wouldn't say that was always the case then, or I probably did like ramrod some of my decisions, but then God still works in that. And so I just want to qualify that. I feel like I need to tell people I made mistakes. I had to learn things. I had to make apologies and amends, but also I've seen this really beautiful way that because I did stick with those things, even some of those people who had grievances later came and said, "Hey, can you help me with this?" Because of that. And it was like this restoration piece, that you couldn't have even planned. And so I'm very grateful for that piece of it with it. And something that came with it for me. So my brother died by suicide. And because of doing Mrs. International, the girl who had been with him leading to that and knew the last days of his life reached out to me and found me on the internet and said, "Hey, I saw you did this. I don't know if you remember me." She invited me to New York and she walked me through the last days of his life. And it took 10 years for me to get to do that. And it was because of this thing, Mrs. International, where she found me, reached out and I got to connect. And like, those are the things that people, I'm not sure they always understand when you're like, you're doing a beauty pageant. And I'm like, yeah, it's bigger. It's bigger than that. And I don't have all the answers. I'm not sure we're supposed to. Like, right? That's faith versus knowledge.
Amen.
We had that knowledge at the beginning. Would we still have had that faith?
Right. Amen.
So yeah, there's beauty in everything. Nothing
Well,
is.
and you also said, I'm not fearless, I'm curious. I thought that was powerful.
Curiosity is probably one of the markers. Like if you can hold to that and just be curious about it and ask yourself questions, not necessarily asking others questions. I think that's good too, when you know how to ask yourself questions, because that's being an adult, personal responsibility, looking internally. That's how you're actually, when you can answer you, that's how you can have a no for someone else. And it's actually, it can be a kind no too. No's can be kind. I love talking to people about this. I'm like, how many of you like saying no? And people are like, you know, you might, and I'm like, not a lot of us.
Right.
No's are kind. Like they can be, because it's better to have a gentle no than like a harsh yes that you can't ever do or fulfill. So no's can be kind.
Oh, that's so good. So as I sit and listen to you, like we said, humble beginnings. You probably were the first one that had a college degree, maybe even graduated from high school or college degree in your.
College. Mhm.
Okay. So, best track runner or whatever, hurdler in the state of California, D1 athlete, Mrs. International, American Ninja Warrior. I mean, look her up online. I mean, this woman is the whole package. She really, really is. 3 gorgeous children who are very talented athletes as well. And you are still continuing to listen to and to expand yourself and to build others and to, I call it listening to the Holy Spirit. And
Yep.
you're not afraid to. What drives you? Why do you continue? Why do you continue to be all in?
Coffee. No, I'm just kidding. That was my joke. That was my caffeine joke. You know, it's interesting. I was talking to someone recently. I went to Minneapolis last week and I wanted to attend someone's like trauma group, right? Because we all have trauma. We always have these things. And you were talking about this a little bit, like what's in the basement, shame, and in these different parts, and how do we interact with it? And they said to me, they were introducing me kind of like you, which was so sweet. And except I didn't know what direction she was going with it. And she's like, I had shared a bit of my story. And she goes, and look at this. She's done all these things and she's been so successful and there's lots of success. I was like, okay, I hear that. And I'm waiting, and she said, and thank God none of it worked to transform her, that she had to be in surrender with the Lord. And I was like, oh, that's good.
Wow.
And I started to like weep a little bit because, right, all these things have happened in my life, but it wasn't, I will say, until probably this year that I believe God is breaking me open to transform me and actually heal that trauma. And I loved, so you're talking about your basement moments, because I've had these things and we can have these moments where you're like, yeah, God's got it, which he does, but that doesn't negate work.
Amen.
And that's also the invitation of the Holy Spirit to work in it and move in it and be in surrender, and what that really, really looks like. And I believe what God spoke to me this year is, I need to break you to heal you. And it made me think about like mosaics and all these things that like they have to get broken to be this thing that we could never expect. And that's really the next part of our life and my life. Like, and so I'm grateful for all those things. But to answer your question of what really moves me is, I want other people to believe that and see it and know it and be empowered. And I like, I don't believe there's anything actually extraordinary about me. I'm pretty basic. I wear slippers all the time. I have them on right now, quite honestly.
You're 100% muscle. I do know that.
Oh, pink even. I like them.
Yeah. I was like, people didn't know they were going to see feet in this interview. And so that's just it, right? This isn't everyone. Everything we're talking about, all of these things. And it doesn't mean that you have to go on to be on American Ninja Warrior or be a vice president or do these things. Like, what is that in your life, your purpose? How do you want to do that? One of the most influential people in my life, I mean, you're one of those, Amy, another one, her name is Lori. And as a single mom, when I was going through my years after divorce and we had gone through bankruptcy and everything was just very difficult financially, to the point that I did go to a food pantry for about a year. And my kids thought it was exciting. And I was like, I hope they don't remember this part. And part of me does. But she would pick out clothes for my kids, and every couple months, and she knew all their sizes and all these things, and she was so sweet. And that was actually very helpful for me as a single mom. And her ministry is doing this for families that God speaks to her that they're in need, right? And what did that help me do? Because of her, that released some financial burden that I was able to focus on some of these other things. Like, she's a part of my story. You've been generous to my kids and I in ways that you don't even know that I may have been struggling financially, and all of a sudden you're like, I just wanted to bless you. And I'm like, I can buy groceries. Like, and what that does to help empower other people. So I want to be very clear. Doesn't mean you need to do all these things, but like, you have something for you that you are being called up to and you are being called to. And so ask about it, get curious. What are the what ifs? What are things you've said never to? They might be a compass, your nevers. So those are the ways that it keeps me going. I wake up and I want people to feel loved. Now they can choose that. Like, I might be able to give them that feeling for a moment or for a day, but the love we experience, the love of God, we have to find that for ourselves too, where even if we were without any of it, we wake up and we know we are known and loved and cherished. Oh, so I feel like I'm gonna get weepy.
Well, I've been crying this whole darn interview. Maggie. You do that to me every time. Like I said, you're just one of my favorite people. Okay, go ahead.
No, that was a longer answer, but that's the answer. And part of my hope and mission now is really this capacity to share about surrender and what does that look like and the work it takes for our wound work,
Yes.
right? I had someone share with me, like, when I had my brain injury on American Ninja Warrior, and I was baffled. How could I continue? I don't even remember the run. I remember being on the starting line, and then I was back in my kitchen in Nebraska, and that's all I knew. And so when they aired that episode, I got to watch it with the rest of the world, and I don't understand. And a person at Madonna Rehabilitation was sitting down with me, which, first of all, I will say, I didn't even want to do therapy at first. I was like, I'm fine, everything's fine. You know, I'm super uncomfortable with emotions at that point. Like, I'm just a go person. And a couple months in, I was like, hey, I'm not fine. And they're like, we don't understand. And I was like, I probably need help. And they're like, I'm not reading you. I'm like, I'm very uncomfortable. I need a therapist. They're like, oh, got it. I was like, this is taking all of me right now. But she was the one who told me because I was really struggling with it. How did I continue? And she said, you've been a survivor your whole life. That's all you know how to do. And that's who showed up as the person that survives. And that's useful, right? It can be useful being a survivor. It's a useful tool. It keeps us going, but it can also not be useful in the ways that if I can't let go and actually let God work, if I'm still trying to solve it and survive and do this, but I'm asking, like, God, will you heal me? And he's like, yeah, I would love to. Knock it off. I got you, like, and that this isn't what happens in my home. I don't sit here and talk to two sides. It's perfect right here.
It's okay if you do, because sometimes I do, so it's okay.
Yeah. There's going to be like a handful of women on this who like, I feel seen,
Well, and
but moving out of survivor mode to actually live.
yes. And that brings me to, and I think so many times as women, as maybe women who have experienced challenges, maybe for you and I in particular, having walked through a relationship change and raising our children, co-parenting, or even on our own sometimes. I kind of call it the masculine or the feminine, right? So, I mean, we fall into like having to do it all, that survival mode, and like knowing that, God does have us, but yet it isn't until we do that true surrender because you just feel like you have to do it all. Your survival, you have no other choice. And to me, that feminine is like receiving the love from God, receiving what God has. And that receiving is hard for us sometimes who aren't, we're not used to receiving.
Yes. That Miss Independent piece, right? That like learning submission, I'll just say that was an icky word to me because I was like, submission. Like I was a boxer. I mean, I've done all kinds of weird things, right? Like if you watch some of my videos and we had ninja versus ninja, like you literally see me elbowing someone because I was like, I will not lose, you know, on an obstacle. And I'm like, ooh, she's scary. But so this submission piece was icky until I started to see the beauty in it, which means it's this co-laboring and partnership. And I had shared with someone, which some people may hear this the wrong way, or maybe at some point in their life, it'll resonate with them. I was like, I feel like I was in my first relationship after I got married. So I'd been married, gone through divorce. And then I was like,
Yes.
oh, this is what relationships are supposed to, you know? And so that was just very different. And it was, and still can be hard for me to turn all that off because I would love to co-labor and be a teammate. And even to the simple point, if someone was like, can I carry your luggage? I was like, no, you know.
I got it. Yeah.
Well, I'm like, I need a workout. So, you know,
I think that's why I got you, girl. I got you.
yeah, it is an actual love language. If someone lets me carry all the luggage, I'm like, you see me.
You see how strong I am. You see my strength.
Yeah, well, but that's literally me trying to fit in my workout at little points whenever I can. I was like, okay, what can I do today? You know, ankle raises when I'm brushing my teeth. Like that's how I get it in. But
Well, and I had the privilege of listing and selling Maggie's house. And she did, when you were saying these little, you know, odds and ends, how you could squeeze your workouts in, there literally was like a pull-up bar, whatever, in the kitchen, or, you know, like a rope from one tree to another that you could, you know, practice on. So I love that about you, fit it in.
Feisty and fit it in.
Yes.
Oh yeah, it's something that I'm growing into and I'm enjoying. And I think even at one point in my life, like being named a vice president, great. Like I remember being so like thirsty for that a couple years ago. And it's pivoted. I'm grateful, but it's really more of a responsibility for leadership and change and impact. And you could take away the title and it's so much more, but that's part of how we get to grow and shift and change. And as you said, someone may have been married for 20 years and like they're different people. And I'm excited to meet me in 10 years.
Ah, so good.
And then who is she? I want to know her. Like I wrote a poem about it. I don't know. I write poems now on the boardwalk in downtown Omaha in my neon yellow Barbie roller skates about it. I kind of wrote about the rest of my life and what's she like, right? Like, so who's the future you? Who is she? And
so, who is she? Who is the future Maggie? Who is the future Maggie Thorne?
yeah, first of all, she's super hot.
Always. Of course.
But, you know, I think that she's simpler and her home is open and welcome. And I actually used a house analogy. I'll send you my poem. Don't share it, Amy, but it's a house one. But it was someone who her roots are deep and they're not in thorns and they're not in rocks, but they're just roots that are so deep and they're like this wellspring of life to really love and impact those. So if anyone, right, were to pick from that tree that bared fruit, like they would just be nourished. And so whatever else is around that, like, I don't know. My sense is you might read the poem when you cried. I cried as I wrote it. And I'm sitting in this very busy area on a bench in my roller skates, writing a poem I believe is being spoken to me. And this little boy sits next to me and I have tears coming out from under my sunglasses. He really wanted me to look at him. And I was like, I can't look at this child. And his dad was like, hey, leave her alone. And I was like, but that's a beautiful part of life that we get to enter into. And so as I talked about, my readers that I have and these things, like, I'm just excited. I'm excited for that next. It used to be something I was scared of. And I would say I was even a little scared of aging. And now I'm like, no, I'm excited for that next part of life. So it seems softer and simpler, and maybe Ninja Warrior. We'll see.
Yes. I love it. Good. We'll be keeping our eyes out for that. And again, it's been such a privilege to visit with you. And as we bring this, I don't want it to end, but we're going to bring it in for a landing. And I would love to know, as you know, the podcast is called Meet Me in the Penthouse. So is my book that will be coming out that you are featured in.
First in line. Well, your sister's first in line, then me.
Yes. What does living in the penthouse mean to you?
Living in the penthouse, what it means to me is that part of ourselves where we're not afraid to climb the limits. I guess that's how I'm taking it in, having just heard it for the first time today, seeing the use of the basement moments and understanding that part of ourselves, and even seeing that it's this foundation for these ways that we want to continue to build. And so being open to what building it looks like. And I actually had someone talk to me about this part of my life as a house remodel, and that you might take down walls and you don't know what it's going to look like. And then you have to pivot, but you're still have this outcome for this finished build, so to speak, that you get to make of it what you want. So I think the penthouse can be expansive. It can be challenging, but it's going to be beautiful. And you have to ask yourself, is it going to be simple? Is it going to be packed? But you start with an open slate. And I think that's very exciting.
My gosh, what a blessing you are. What a blessing you are. And I can't wait to see what Maggie in 10 years and Amy and Molly in 10 years, right?
No, I think you reversed aged. I'm just going to say it. Put that in the recording. I'm very.
Oh my gosh. Oh, bless your heart. Thank you. It's what happiness does, Maggie. When I stepped out of a race I knew I wasn't meant to be in, and I am madly in love with my life. I am so madly in love that I am so emotional, and it's tears of gratitude. It's tears of gratitude. And thank you, Jesus, for these moments and for women like you in my life and in Molly's life.
I am so happy for you right now. It's very great to hear. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for tuning in today for Meet Me in the Penthouse with Sisters Amy and Molly. Please rate and review. We love those 5-star ratings and would love to have you go to our website at sistersnextdoor.com.